Let's get to Shaun Kenney. Shaun is the new editor-in-chief of the up-and-coming blog, The Republican Standard. He's also a long-time Republican consultant and operative in the Mid-Atlantic. Shaun, good to have you.
Great to be back. Good to be in the show.
Happy New Year to your lovely family and your clan. Did everything go well?
Yes. Kids made out like bandits, and that's what it's all about. I think I got T-shirts and all that nonsense. But beyond that, kids had an absolute blast, especially with the younger ones. Youngest is 5 now, so Christmas is always a real special time for them.
Okay, so here's my question for your kids a little bit older. Are they on PS4 or are they on the new Xbox One?
Totally PS4 for life. Yep.
PS4. See that,
yeah.
Mike? PS4. Now, Joseph was on Xbox. Then he wanted a PS4. I don't understand how this works. We got him that. Now he's back on Xbox One. We had to buy that for Christmas. So I don't really get the whole thing, but I think it's a scam, right? Like, pick one or the other, right?
One does just as well as the other one.
And
right?
then he sells his, and then he says to me, all right, you guys give me the Xbox One for Christmas, and I guarantee I will sell the PS4 for half of what you're going to pay for the Xbox. I'm like, I don't think so. He did. I mean, it's like he did. He sold it.
Out like a bandit there.
He sold it. I mean, and then like somehow he ended up with the cash. So like that wasn't a deal either. I got to figure this whole thing out. Shaun, speaking of cash and taxpayer abuse, so you did a FOIA the other day, and in your column on the Republican Standard, I was shocked by this. I got to tell you, because Aubrey Lane, Transportation Secretary, I think he's done a good job. He's a Republican from Virginia Beach in McAuliffe's cabinet, now been tabbed for the Director of Finance in the Ralph Northam administration. And you did an expose on him, and you find out that this guy Aubrey Lane, spent like $160,000 of taxpayer money on private aircraft. Some of the planes he took with his wife were like an hour by car. He spent more than the governor, any other cabinet member. Some cabinet members didn't spend anything on aircraft. What's the deal with this?
Yeah, so what we have effectively here is that the Republican Standard went ahead and issued a FOIA request to state government back in December. We finally got the results of these, and pouring over the information, we find out that over the course of 4 years, Secretary Lane traveled on the state plane 251 times.
Wow.
Of those times, there were 41 solo trips that appear to be short distance of about 100 miles or less. The Commonwealth of Virginia typically advises that if it's short distance, 2 hours, you use a car. And one would think that as transportation secretary, one might actually use the transportation network that they're overseeing. And unfortunately, that's just not what we have here. And what's a little bit more notable is that Secretary Lane, with his 251 flights, this isn't just more than his peers. We're talking more by a factor of almost double. I mean, I think Secretary of Commerce and Trade, Todd Haymore, has had 135 flights over the same period of time. Secretary Basil Gooden, who's with Agriculture and Forestry, 18 times. Health and Human Resources Secretary, 10 times. Some of these are going to be routine, right? But 251 flights seems a bit excessive, especially when so many of them are not only solo trips, but some of them, where the sole passenger was only Secretary Lane's wife, makes it seem like there's something a little bit more behind this. And the price tag of what we can estimate, at least based on what the Commonwealth of Virginia charges per hour for a flight, at $156,000 to the state taxpayer, seems rather obtuse.
I don't know. There's something about this that really sticks in my throat like a chicken bone. You're the Secretary of Transportation. I mean, you're taking flights of an hour or an hour and a half. Okay, now, Shaun, every week I drive from Virginia Beach to Washington, D.C. Many times I drive in the same day, Virginia Beach, Richmond, and back. That's, 200 miles, 100 each way. It takes me an hour and a half. You get in the car, you get on the phone, you go. I mean, why would you be taking a plane for this? I mean, it speaks to me of a level of arrogance that's beyond the pale. And there's also a duplicity here because, look, I was the first one to call for Tom Price, Secretary of Health and Human Resources, to get fired when it was reported that he blew $500,000 on private jets, one of them going from Washington to Philadelphia, which is like an hour and 10 minutes by limo. I mean, it's mind-boggling to me. Arrogance, the Washington Post all over it. Yet we have this story, and there's not a peep out of anybody. Like, that's okay, but Tom Price isn't. I think both of them ought to be accountable for this, right?
Yeah, and it's somewhat interesting that the mainstream media sort of avoided the story at this rate, and the Virginia pilot actually had something very brief, very short on what was otherwise a glowing piece for Secretary Lane. And look, it's not my responsibility to tell them how to report their news stories, but for TRS and what we're doing here, I mean, it's I think the temptation for them is to sort of treat this as a blog, and that's not exactly what this is. And if you look at Slate, you look at Vox, you look at Axios, these are publications that go ahead and remain online, and they don't go to print. But they produce quality journalism, and that's, in our opinion, so, this, among other stories we've done at the Republican Standard, I think meets that bar. I mean, this is not the only shoe to drop on this. We're going to be following this story up. But there's more to this, and I think as we take a closer look, not just at Secretary Lane, but at other members of the cabinet, maybe we've got some other problems here that need to come to the light of day. And this is the kind of journalism that, unfortunately, we're missing in Virginia, and I think we're pretty proud of being able to give it to a more discerning readership.
Okay, so that's your blog, The Republican Standard, and I hear what you're saying, and look, you are right. I'm a newspaper guy my whole career until I went into radio, so I get print, but a couple of the sites that you mentioned, they have never had any presence whatsoever. They're online, and they're taken seriously by mainstream media because they criticize the president. Okay, so I guess if you criticize the president, you're taken seriously. If you don't, then you're called, I think the pilot called you let me get this straight, a right-wing blog, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah,
pretty much.
Because they don't like.
And I was going after the Tom Price. Well, then I'd be the cutting edge of digital media. So,
exactly.
But this again, when we start talking about the objectivity of the mainstream media and the legacy press, it's just not there. If this was Bob McDonnell, for instance, who had taken the state plane on numerous occasions, I'm sure that the media would have a different story. And look, these are just the bubbles that certain media outlets are in. I get that. I understand that things that are news to conservatives may not be news to liberals. But again, this is where independent media and digital media has an opportunity to sort of break that mold and get these stories out that otherwise wouldn't be seen. For that matter, for the stuff that you do here on the John Fredericks Radio Show, I mean, these things matter at the end of the day. This is the reason why folks are looking for alternative outlets, and for one, I'm glad to be able to provide it, and especially on something that matters so much to taxpayers.
Let me tell you one thing that Lane said. And look, I think Gorby Lane has done a good job as transportation secretary. He's been on my show numerous times, and I would support him staying in that position. I don't know how you become the finance director of the governor of the Commonwealth of Virginia when you're abusing taxpayer dollars in this bold and arrogant way. But here's what he says in the pilot. Lane said that some of the 41 times he flew alone were short legs and same days while visiting the state's 50-plus smaller airports to make sure operations were running correctly. I mean, you have got to be kidding me, right? Like, I flew on these small planes to be sure that these small airports, like the one in Wakefield, was operating smoothly. And so, that's why I sacrificed myself. And even though I was able to ride in the plush plane and put my feet up and have some caviar and have a bagel and lox and somebody served me a cup of coffee, I just wanted to be sure the airports were running smoothly. This is the height of arrogance. I can't believe this, right? First of all, that's not even believable. But then the fact that he can fly in all these planes, just drive. I mean, McAuliffe drives, right? Sure. I've talked to the governor on my show 15 times. He's on his cell phone, and God knows where. He jumps in a car, they go. How come you have to have a private aircraft? It's the height of arrogance, Shaun.
Yeah, or pick up the phone.
Pick up the phone.
Look at their logs.
Look, get
ask
this.
Them how they're doing that way. I mean, the very fact of the matter is that we have so many flights that are under 100 miles. That seems to me to be a bit obtuse. And certainly the taxpayers of the Commonwealth deserve a little bit stronger an answer than that. Especially when you're dealing with the Transportation Secretary, who, by the way, is responsible for the very roads that average Virginians have to travel, especially when we're paying $44 for Terry tolls up in Northern Virginia just to access roads that we've already paid for. For the Secretary of Transportation, who's now promoting himself to Secretary of Finance, to have such a sort of glib response, I think it's truly shocking. I think it shows the mentality that we have in Richmond when it comes to other people's money, and certainly the taxpayers of Virginia.
Totally arrogant. His predecessor director of transportation under McDonald's, Shaun, said in the pilot article that he used the plane about 12 times in 4 years and spent a few $1,000s as opposed to $165,000. It's just a height of arrogance. And then, Aubrey Lane basically saying, screw you, I'm the finance director now, I do it again. But now, I'm not going to ride the plane because, my job is in Richmond. I'm just sick of these people. And I like Aubrey Lane. I think he's done a good job, but I think his answers to the pilot were self-serving and arrogant. And this is the culture that we have in the swamp. These people think they can just, they're government employees, they're untouchable, and they got big egos, and they can just do whatever they want. And I think average, people driving to work, having to pay these tolls. Here's the other thing. You got all this road construction. Instead of checking out rural airports, why don't you get your butt in a car and travel on the same damn roads that you're in charge of that we have to drive on? That's the other thing that pisses me off. I'm driving on the roads. You ought to drive on them too. You're the damn Secretary of Transportation. You should be driving on the roads. Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And look, I mean, especially with I-66 and whatnot and the fiasco that happened up there, people forget the taxpayers of the Commonwealth have already paid for these roads. I mean, we've already paid the taxes. They've already been built. We're already subsidizing with our tax dollars. This additional fee is being used to build alternative modes of transit, such as bike paths, subsidizing light rail, mass transit, things of this nature. So it's a double taxation where, once again, the government just dipped their hands into our back pocket and now deems to go ahead and dip our hands back into our pocket to go ahead and pay for things we may not use and do not want.
Bunch of nonsense.
At the end of the day, when you've got hardworking taxpayers that are actually cutting corners, trying to figure out what parts of their budget they're going to have to cut, food, medicine, clothing, what have you, vacation time, whatever the case may be, for government to come back and say, well, we're just going to go ahead and stick ahead a $44 or even a $20 toll to hardworking families that are sometimes you're pulling down $10, $15 an hour, that's just absolutely unconscionable. And to kind of flip it off as glib or to go ahead and fly over it in your own private state plane, it seems like there's a disconnect there that needs to be addressed.
Just a state of arrogance that is beyond the pale. Shaun, Kenney, thanks for being with us. You can read Shaun Kenney on his new, RepublicanStandard.com, right?
There you go,
RepublicanStandard.com every day. Thanks, Shaun, for being with us.